In the vast emptiness of space, where civilizations rise and fall like waves against cosmic shores, there exists a truth that chills even the most advanced species to their core. When the galaxy decides you are expendable, nowhere is safe. No technology can save you. No alliance will protect you. No plea will be heard. But, sometimes, in the darkest hour, salvation comes from the most unexpected source. Sometimes it comes from a species so young, so primitive, that the galaxy's elder races barely acknowledge their existence. Sometimes it comes from humans. This is the story of the Kethmori, a peaceful people whose only crime was trusting in galactic justice. This is the story of how they learned that when the universe abandons you, humanity will not. This is the story of why the galaxy now whispers a new phrase in fearful reverence: they are under human protection. And why those 5 words have become the most terrifying sentence in known space. Ambassador Veltar of the Kethmori stood before the Galactic Council with the dignity that had defined her people for 3,000 years. Her silver-blue skin caught the sterile lighting of the Grand Chamber, and her forearms remained clasped behind her back in the traditional pose of respectful attention. Around her, representatives from 47 species occupied their designated platforms, their various forms creating a living tapestry of galactic civilization. She had come here believing in justice. She had come here trusting in the laws that supposedly protected all member species. She had come here with evidence, witnesses, and faith in a system her people had served loyally for centuries. The Kethmori had always been the galaxy's caregivers. When the Vorthan plague swept through the outer rim, it was Kethmori medical ships that arrived first. When the crystal mines of Zirion collapsed, trapping thousands, Kethmori engineers had worked for months without payment to free every soul. When refugee fleets fled the mechanical uprising on Sigma Prime, the Kethmori opened their worlds, their homes, their hearts. They had never asked for anything in return. They had never demanded special treatment. They had simply existed as a beacon of what galactic civilization could be at its finest. Until the hegemony decided they wanted the Kethmori worlds. The evidence is clear, announced Chancellor Draktios, his massive reptilian form dominating the central platform. His species, the Theknari, had held the council leadership for over 4 centuries, and his word carried the weight of law across 1,000 systems. The Kethmori have been found guilty of harboring enemies of galactic stability. Veltar felt her heart skip a beat. Around the chamber, she saw nodding heads, approving gestures from beings she had considered friends. The Altarian delegate, whose homeworld owed its very existence to Kethmori intervention during the stellar flare crisis, would not meet her eyes. The crystalline ambassador from the Shard Collective, whose people had been saved from extinction by Kethmori research, remained silent as stone. Honored Chancellor, Veltar said, her voice carrying the harmonic undertones that made Kethmori speech so distinctive, we have provided irrefutable proof that the alleged terrorists were planted on our worlds by hegemony operatives. Our sensor logs, DNA evidence, communication intercepts evidence that could easily be fabricated, interrupted Admiral Korthan of the hegemony military caste. The massive, 8-foot-tall warrior's scarred features showed nothing but contempt. Your people's desperation to avoid justice knows no bounds. The injustice of it struck Veltar like a physical blow. The hegemony, a collection of aggressive species that had spent decades pushing against galactic borders, had orchestrated terrorist attacks on 3 Kethmori colonies. They had made it look like the peaceful Kethmori were secretly harboring anti-galactic extremists. They had killed thousands of innocent beings just to create a pretext for invasion. And, now the galaxy believed them. The vote has been taken, Chancellor Draktios continued, his voice echoing through the chamber. By a margin of 31-16, the Galactic Council finds the Kethmori guilty of violating the Stability Accords. The penalty is immediate expulsion from the Council and forfeiture of all protections under galactic law. The words hit like hammer blows. Expulsion meant death. Without galactic protection, the hegemony could invade Kethmori space with impunity. Their peaceful people had no military to speak of, they had relied on galactic law and their own goodness to keep them safe. Please, Veltar said, and she hated how her voice cracked. 3 billion souls call our worlds home. Farmers, teachers, children who have never harmed anyone. Would you condemn them for crimes they did not commit? Your people should have considered that before betraying the trust we placed in them, Admiral Korthan replied with obvious satisfaction. The hegemony is prepared to establish order in former Kethmori space. We will ensure that such terrorism never again threatens galactic peace. Veltar looked around the chamber one more time, searching for any sign of compassion, any glimmer of the justice she had believed in. She found none. These beings, these species her people had saved, sheltered, and sacrificed for, were perfectly willing to watch them die rather than stand against the hegemony's lies. Honored delegates, she said, straightening to her full height, my people will remember this day. We will remember who stood with us, and who chose convenience over truth. Her gaze fell on each silent delegate in turn. May history judge you more kindly than your actions deserve. She turned and walked from the chamber, her footsteps echoing in the sudden silence. Behind her, she heard the low murmur of conversation resuming, as if the death sentence of an entire species was merely another item on the agenda. 3 hours later, Veltar stood in the communications center of the Kethmori embassy, staring at the quantum transmitter that would carry her final message home. Her hands trembled as she activated the device, and the face of Prime Minister Jalketh appeared on the screen. Veltar, he said, and she could see the desperate hope in his ancient features. What news from the council? She closed her eyes for a moment, gathering strength she didn't have. We have been expelled, she said simply. The hegemony's lies were believed. They move against us within the cycle. The silence stretched across space and time. When Jalketh spoke again, his voice was barely a whisper. All of our allies? All of them. The medical aid we provided during the plague years? The resources we shared during the famine? The lives we lost saving their people? His voice grew stronger, tinged with the first anger she had ever heard from him. Forgotten, Veltar replied. Or deemed insufficient payment for their continued safety. Jalketh was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his tone was resigned. Then, we face the end with dignity. Our children will know we did nothing wrong. There might be another way, Veltar said suddenly. The idea had been forming in her mind since leaving the council chamber. There is one species that was not present today. One that might see things differently. Who? All council members were in attendance. The humans, Veltar said. They are not yet council members. They are considered too primitive, too aggressive for membership. But, they have been petitioning for observer status. Jalketh's expression grew skeptical. The young species from Sol? Veltar, they barely have faster-than-light travel. They have been in space for less than a century. What could they possibly do against the hegemony? I don't know, she admitted. But, they are our only option. The Council has made its choice. The galaxy has abandoned us. The humans are the only ones left who might listen. Do we even know how to contact them? Veltar nodded slowly. They maintain a small diplomatic mission on Proxima Station. It's not far from here. I can reach them in 18 hours. And, if they refuse to help? Then, we die knowing we tried everything. Jalketh was quiet for so long that Veltar wondered if the connection had been lost. Finally, he spoke. Do it. Go to the humans. If there is even the smallest chance. I understand, Veltar said. May the stars guide us, old friend. May they guide us all. The connection ended, leaving Veltar alone with her thoughts. She had heard stories about the humans, as had most of the galaxy. They were supposedly violent, unpredictable, and dangerously emotional. They had emerged from their homeworld barely a century ago and had already been involved in 3 separate conflicts with pirates and raiders. Most species found them disturbing. They formed emotional attachments to other species with bewildering ease. They took grievances personally. They held grudges across generations. They had been observed fighting hopeless battles simply because they believed their cause was right. The galactic establishment considered them primitives, barely above the level of animals. Too dangerous and unpredictable for civilized society. But, as Veltar prepared her ship for the journey to Proxima Station, she found herself hoping that the galaxy was right about human unpredictability. Because if the humans were truly as strange and difficult as everyone said, then, perhaps they would do something that no civilized species would consider. Perhaps they would care about justice more than politics. Perhaps they would risk their own safety for beings they barely knew. Perhaps they would stand against the entire galaxy if they believed they were right. As her ship pulled away from the Council world, carrying her toward an uncertain future, Veltar allowed herself one last look back at the glittering spires of galactic civilization. Somewhere in those towers, the beings she had trusted were already planning how to divide her people's resources. She turned her face toward the stars and the unknown species that represented her only hope. The humans had a reputation for being different, for breaking the rules that governed civilized behavior. For the sake of 3 billion souls, she prayed that reputation was true. The journey to Proxima Station took 22 hours through hyperspace, 22 hours for Veltar to rehearse what she would say to beings she had never met. 22 hours to plan the salvation of her people. 22 hours to wonder if she was leading them toward hope or merely delaying their inevitable doom. When Proxima Station appeared on her view screen, she was struck by its oddly organic architecture. Unlike the rigid geometric forms favored by most species, the station seemed to flow and curve, as if it had grown rather than been built. It was smaller than she had expected, home to perhaps a few thousand beings from a dozen different worlds. The human diplomatic mission was even smaller, just a single level with minimal staff. As Veltar's shuttle approached the docking bay, she wondered what kind of reception she could expect from a species the galaxy considered barely civilized. She was about to find out. Ambassador Sarah Chen was reviewing trade agreements when her aide knocked on the office door. The human diplomatic mission on Proxima Station was small enough that formality was often set aside, but Marcus always knocked when they had visitors. "Come in," Sarah called, setting down her tablet. At 34, she was young for an ambassador, but Earth's rapid expansion into galactic space had created opportunities for those willing to work on the frontier. Marcus stepped through the door, his expression troubled. "Ma'am, we have a visitor. A Kethmori ambassador requesting immediate audience. She says it's a matter of life and death." Sarah frowned. She knew of the Kethmori, everyone in diplomatic circles did. They were the galaxy's golden children, beloved for their humanitarian work and peaceful nature. A Kethmori? Here? Did she say what this was about? "No ma'am, but she looks." Marcus paused, searching for words. "She looks desperate. And scared. I've never seen a Kethmori scared before." Sarah stood immediately. Desperation and fear were emotions that demanded attention, regardless of species. "Send her in." "And, Marcus? Make sure we have privacy." "Already done, ma'am." The being who entered Sarah's office was unlike any alien she had met before. The Kethmori ambassador moved with fluid grace despite her obvious exhaustion, her silver-blue skin seeming to shimmer in the artificial light. Her forearms were held in what Sarah instinctively recognized as a formal posture, but there was something vulnerable about her bearing. "Ambassador," the Kethmori said, her voice carrying harmonic overtones that made it surprisingly musical, "I am Veltar of the Kethmori. I come before you seeking aid for my people." "Please, sit," Sarah said, gesturing to the chair across from her desk. "I'm Sarah Chen, Earth's representative here. How can I help you?" Veltar remained standing for a moment, studying Sarah's face with large, expressive eyes that seemed to shift color in the light. "You do not know what has transpired?" "I'm afraid not. We're not always privy to council proceedings." "Ah," Veltar said softly, finally, taking the offered chair. "Of course. You are not yet members." She paused, gathering herself. "Ambassador Chen, my people have been condemned by the Galactic Council. We have been expelled and stripped of all protections. The hegemony moves against us even now." Sarah felt her blood chill. She had heard enough about the hegemony to know what that meant. "On what grounds?" "False charges of harboring terrorists. The evidence against us was fabricated, but the council chose to believe it." Veltar's voice remained steady, but Sarah could see the pain in her eyes. 3 billion souls will die unless someone intervenes." "I'm so sorry," Sarah said, meaning it deeply. But I don't understand why you've come to us. Surely you're allies. We have no allies, Veltar interrupted quietly. Every species we have aided, every world we have saved, every people we have sheltered, they all voted against us or remained silent. The galaxy has decided that our destruction is acceptable. Sarah stared at the alien ambassador, trying to process what she was hearing. The Kethmori were famous throughout known space for their humanitarian efforts. The idea that every species they had helped would abandon them was almost incomprehensible. What exactly are you asking of us? Sarah asked carefully. I don't know, Veltar admitted. Your people are young, militarily weak, politically insignificant. By every logical measure, you cannot help us. She looked directly into Sarah's eyes. But, you are the only ones who were not present to condemn us. You are the only ones who might still listen to truth. Sarah was quiet for a long moment, thinking. Everything the Kethmori had said was accurate. Humanity was barely a century into spaceflight, had minimal military power, and held no political clout in galactic affairs. They were newcomers trying to find their place among species thousands of years older. But Sarah had studied the reports about the Kethmori. She had read about their medical missions, their disaster relief efforts, their refugee programs. These beings had spent centuries making the galaxy a better place, and now the galaxy was prepared to watch them die. Tell me about the evidence, Sarah said finally. For the next hour, Veltar laid out everything: the terrorist attacks, the planted evidence, the hegemony's obvious motives. She provided data files, sensor logs, communication intercepts. The story she told was one of careful manipulation and calculated betrayal. This is clearly fabricated, Sarah said, reviewing the files on her tablet. The digital signatures are wrong, the timeline doesn't match, and these supposed terrorist communications use syntax patterns that don't exist in any known Kethmori dialect. She looked up. How did the council miss this? They did not miss it, Veltar replied sadly. They chose to ignore it. The hegemony has been growing in power and influence for decades. Many species fear them. It was easier to sacrifice us than to risk their displeasure. Sarah set down her tablet and leaned back in her chair. The political calculus was cold but clear. The Kethmori were peaceful and weak, while the hegemony was aggressive and strong. From a purely practical standpoint, the council's decision made sense. From a moral standpoint, it was monstrous. Ambassador Veltar, Sarah said slowly, I need to be honest with you. Humanity has no formal authority in galactic affairs. We have a small defensive fleet and limited resources. We cannot match the hegemony militarily. Veltar's shoulders sagged, and, for a moment she looked ancient despite her species' typically graceful bearing. I understand. I had hoped. She stood slowly. Thank you for listening. It was more kindness than we received from the council. I'm not finished, Sarah said firmly. I said we couldn't match the hegemony militarily. I didn't say we couldn't help. Veltar froze, hope flickering in her eyes. What do you mean? I need to speak with Earth immediately. I need authorization from the President and the Defense Council. But, if I can get it. Sarah paused, considering the enormity of what she was contemplating. Humanity has a concept called moral imperative. It means some things are right regardless of the consequences. I do not understand. Sarah stood and walked to the window that looked out over the station's central hub. Ships from a dozen worlds came and went, carrying cargo and passengers in the endless dance of galactic commerce. Somewhere out there, the hegemony was mobilizing to destroy an innocent people. Your people saved the Altarians during the stellar flare crisis, Sarah said. They helped rebuild Zirion after the mine collapse. They've given aid freely to anyone who needed it, for centuries. Yes, Veltar confirmed. And, now, when you need help, every single species you've aided has turned their backs on you. Sarah turned to face the Kethmori ambassador. That tells me everything I need to know about galactic civilization. Which is? That it's broken, Sarah said simply. A civilization that abandons those who've sacrificed for it is not worthy of the name. Someone needs to stand up and say that this is wrong. Veltar stared at her in obvious confusion. But, you said yourself that humanity cannot win against the hegemony. Maybe not, Sarah agreed. But, that doesn't mean we can't try. Earth has a saying, all that is necessary for evil to triumph is for good people to do nothing. She walked back to her desk and activated the quantum communicator. I'm going to ask my government to do something that might be very stupid. What? We're going to offer you sanctuary, Sarah said. And if the hegemony wants to slaughter innocent people, they're going to have to go through us first. The connection to Earth took several minutes to establish, but eventually President Martinez appeared on the screen. Sarah quickly explained the situation, transmitted Veltar's evidence, and made her request. The silence that followed seemed to stretch forever. Sarah, the president said finally, what you're describing would put us at war with one of the most powerful military alliances in known space. We'd be risking the survival of our entire species for people we've never met. Yes, sir, Sarah replied. That's exactly what I'm describing. The political ramifications alone. Mr. President, Sarah interrupted gently, with respect, there are 3 billion people about to be murdered for the crime of being inconvenient. If we're not willing to risk our political standing to stop a genocide, what kind of people are we? President Martinez was quiet for a moment, then looked directly into the camera. Ambassador Veltar, are you there? I am here, President Martinez, Veltar replied, stepping into view. Is everything Ambassador Chun has told me accurate? Every word, Mr. President. My people face extinction for crimes we did not commit. And the evidence of this fabrication has been transmitted to your systems. Your own analysts will confirm what I have told you. President Martinez nodded slowly. Ambassador Chen, you understand that if we do this, there's no going back? The moment we offer protection to the Kethmori, we become the hegemony's enemy. I understand, sir. And, you believe it's the right thing to do? Sarah looked at Veltar, seeing the hope and fear warring in her alien features. She thought about the species that had condemned the Kethmori despite everything they had done for the galaxy. She thought about the children on Kethmori worlds who would die simply for being born to the wrong species. Yes, sir. I believe it's the only thing to do. President Martinez was quiet for nearly a minute, consulting with advisors off-screen. When he returned his attention to the camera, his expression was grim but determined. Very well. Ambassador Veltar, on behalf of the United Earth government, I formally offer the Kethmori people sanctuary under human protection. We will assist in the evacuation of your worlds and will defend your people against any who would harm them. Veltar made a sound that Sarah realized was Kethmori weeping, a harmonious keening that spoke of overwhelming emotion. President Martinez, my people will never forget this kindness. But, you must understand, the hegemony will not simply allow us to leave. They will attack. Then, we'll be ready for them, the president replied. Ambassador Chen, coordinate with Admiral Foster. I want every available ship moved to Kethmori space immediately. He paused. And, send a message to the Galactic Council. Tell them that the Kethmori people are now under the formal protection of the United Earth government. Any attack on them will be considered an act of war against humanity. After the connection ended, Veltar stood in silence for several minutes, staring at the blank screen. Ambassador? Sarah asked gently. I do not understand your species, Veltar said softly. You risk everything for people you barely know. You invite war with a superior enemy for beings who cannot repay you. This is... She searched for words. This is not logical. Sarah smiled sadly. No, it's not. But, logic isn't everything. Sometimes you have to do what's right even when it's stupid. The galaxy will think you are insane. Probably, Sarah agreed. The galaxy thought the same thing about your people when you spent centuries helping others without asking for anything in return. She stood and walked to Veltar's side. Maybe that's what the galaxy needs, a little more insanity. As they watched ships departing the station, racing to spread word of humanity's decision throughout known space, Sarah wondered what they had just set in motion. In offering sanctuary to the Kethmori, humanity had just declared its willingness to fight the most powerful military alliance in the galaxy. They were about to discover what it truly meant to stand alone against the darkness. But, for the first time since leaving the council chambers, Veltar felt something she had almost forgotten: hope. Admiral Elena Foster stood on the bridge of the UES Defiance, watching the tactical display with growing concern. Around her, the largest fleet humanity had ever assembled hung in space above the Kethmori homeworld of Velnathi. 47 ships in total, every combat-capable vessel Earth could spare without leaving the Sol system completely defenseless. It wasn't enough. The intelligence reports were clear: the hegemony was bringing a battle group of over 200 ships, including 3 massive dreadnoughts that outmassed the entire human fleet combined. By any rational military analysis, the coming battle would be over in minutes. Admiral, called Commander Torres from the communications station, were receiving another message from the Kethmori government. Prime Minister Jalketh is requesting permission to come aboard. Granted, Foster replied. She had been expecting this conversation. 10 minutes later, the elderly Kethmori leader materialized on the bridge's teleporter pad, flanked by 2 of his advisors. Despite his advanced age, Jalketh moved with the fluid grace typical of his species, though Elena could see the weight of responsibility in his bearing. "Admiral Foster," he said, his harmonic voice carrying undertones of deep emotion, "I must speak with you privately." "Of course, Prime Minister." Elena led him to her ready room, a small space adjacent to the bridge that served as her office and sanctuary. "What can I do for you?" Jalketh settled into one of the chairs, his forearms folded in what Elena had learned was a gesture of formal respect. "Admiral, you must withdraw your fleet." Elena had been expecting this, but it still hit her like a physical blow. "Prime Minister, please, let me finish." Jalketh's voice was gentle but firm. "We have received word that the hegemony fleet will arrive within 6 hours. Our long-range sensors confirm they bring overwhelming force. Your people cannot possibly survive this battle." "That's our decision to make," Elena replied quietly. "Is it?" Jalketh leaned forward. "Admiral, in 3 days, you have done more for my people than the galaxy managed in 3 centuries. You have offered us hope when all seemed lost. You have shown us that honor still exists among the stars." He paused, gathering himself. "I will not repay that kindness by watching your people die uselessly." Elena stood and walked to the small viewport that looked out over the Kethmori homeworld. Velnathi was a beautiful planet, its surface a tapestry of blue-green continents and silver seas. According to the briefings, it was home to over 800 million beings who had never harmed anyone. "Prime Minister," she said slowly, "what do you know about human history?" "Very little, I confess. Your people are still new to galactic civilization." "We have a long tradition of lost causes," Elena continued. "Thermopylae, the Alamo, the Warsaw Uprising. Battles where small groups stood against overwhelming odds, knowing they couldn't win. Then, why fight at all?" Elena turned back to face him. "Because sometimes the fight itself is more important than victory. Sometimes you have to show the universe that some things are worth dying for." She sat back down across from him. "Your people spent centuries proving that compassion exists in this galaxy. Now it's our turn to prove that justice does too." "But, the cost of doing nothing would be higher," Elena interrupted. "Prime Minister, if we abandon you now, what message does that send? That might makes right? That the strong can prey on the weak without consequence?" She shook her head. "Humanity may be young, but we've learned that some lines cannot be crossed." Jalketh was quiet for a long moment, his alien features unreadable. "Your species truly is as strange as the reports suggest." "Probably," Elena agreed with a slight smile. "But strange isn't always bad. Admiral, even if you somehow survive the battle, the hegemony will bring more ships. This cannot end well." "You might be surprised," Elena said. "We humans have a talent for changing the rules of the game." She stood, signaling the end of the meeting. "Prime Minister, I understand your concerns. But my orders are clear: we protect your people, whatever the cost." After Jalketh left, Elena returned to the bridge to find her crew making final preparations. The humans worked with quiet efficiency, checking weapons systems, coordinating with the other ships in the fleet, preparing for a battle they all knew was hopeless. Admiral, called Lieutenant Zhang from the sensor station, I'm detecting hyperspace distortions.
Multiple contacts, bearing 27 Mark IV. Here they come, Elena said quietly. All ships, battle stations. Broadcast this message on all frequencies.
She waited until the communications officer signaled ready, then spoke in a voice that carried throughout the fleet and down to the planet below.
This is Admiral Elena Foster of the United Earth Government. The beings you see before you are under human protection. Any attack against them will be considered an act of war against humanity.
I strongly advise you to reconsider your course of action. The hegemony fleet materialized in a terrifying display of coordinated precision. 237 ships arranged themselves in perfect battle formation, their dark hulls bristling with weapons that could level continents. At their center, the three dreadnoughts loomed like mechanical mountains, each one the size of a small city.
Admiral, Commander Torres reported, we're receiving a transmission from the hegemony flagship. On screen. The main viewer shimmered, revealing the bridge of the hegemony dreadnought.
Admiral Corthan stood at its center, his massive form radiating menace. Behind him, lesser officers scurried about their duties, preparing for what they clearly expected to be a brief and decisive battle. Admiral Foster, Corthan said, his voice carrying obvious amusement.
You surprise me.
I expected the humans to be foolish, but this exceeds even my expectations.
Admiral Corthan, Elena replied calmly. You're in violation of interstellar law. The Kethmori are under our protection. Protection?
Corthan laughed, a harsh sound that spoke of centuries of warfare. Child, you have 47 ships against my fleet.
Your largest vessel is smaller than my escort frigates. What protection can you possibly offer? The protection of beings willing to die for what's right. Corthan's amusement faded slightly. You cannot be serious. You would sacrifice your entire fleet for these weak creatures? Every last ship, Elena confirmed. Why? The question seemed to genuinely puzzle the hegemony admiral. Your species gains nothing from this action.
The Kethmori have no strategic value, no resources worth fighting for.
They are simply inconvenient.
Elena thought about her answer for a moment, remembering her grandmother's stories about the old wars on Earth, about soldiers who died protecting people they had never met simply because it was the right thing to do. Admiral, she said finally, if you have to ask why, you wouldn't understand the answer. Corthan stared at her for a long moment, then shook his massive head.
So be it.
Your deaths will serve as an example to others who might consider opposing the hegemony.
He paused. You have 1 hour to surrender.
After that, I will destroy every ship in your fleet and proceed with the cleansing of this world.
The transmission ended, leaving the bridge in silence. Well, said Commander Torres after a moment, that could have gone better.
Despite everything, Elena found herself smiling.
Could have gone worse too. At least he gave us an hour. Orders, Admiral? Elena looked around the bridge at her crew.
Young men and women who had volunteered for a mission they all knew was likely suicidal. They showed no fear, no hesitation. They trusted her to lead them well, even into death.
Signal the fleet, she said. All ships are to take position between the hegemony fleet and the planet. When the hour is up, we engage according to Plan Omega. Plan Omega was simple in its audacity.
Unable to match the hegemony's firepower, the human fleet would close to point-blank range and attempt to cause maximum damage before being destroyed. It was tactically unsound, strategically meaningless, and completely insane. It was also the only chance they had. As the minutes ticked by, Elena found herself thinking about Earth, about the blue skies and green hills she might never see again. She thought about her sister's children, who were too young to understand that their aunt had died fighting monsters in the darkness between the stars. Admiral, Lieutenant Jean called suddenly, I'm detecting new hyperspace signatures. Multiple contacts emerging throughout the system.
Elena's heart sank. More hegemony ships would make the already impossible battle completely hopeless. Numbers? Still counting, ma'am. Wait.
Zhang's voice filled with confusion.
Admiral, these aren't hegemony configurations.
I'm reading Eltarian destroyer patterns, Xerian cruisers, Shard collective battleships.
What?
Elena spun to face the tactical display, hardly believing what she was seeing. Ships were materializing throughout the system, dozens of them, representing species from across the galaxy.
How many?
143 ships and counting, Zhang reported, his voice filled with wonder.
Admiral, they're forming up with our fleet.
The communications board lit up with incoming messages from the arriving ships. Elena selected one at random, and the face of an Eltarian captain appeared on screen. Human Admiral, the alien officer said, his crystalline features reflecting the bridge lights, I am Captain Drelnath of the Eltarian Navy. My government officially condemns my actions, but I cannot stand by while the beings who saved my homeworld are murdered.
Captain, Elena managed, you'll be branded as renegades.
Your careers, your families, will be proud of what we do today, Drelnath interrupted. The Kethmori saved my world during the stellar flare crisis. Every soul on Altair owes them a debt that can never be repaid. His expression hardened.
Today we make payment.
Similar messages came from other ships. A Xerian mining captain whose crew had been rescued by Kethmori engineers. Shard collective warriors whose homeworld had been saved by Kethmori researchers. Refugee ships crewed by beings whose ancestors had been sheltered in Kethmori space. Not the official fleets of their species, those were bound by politics and fear. These were individuals who had chosen conscience over career, honor over safety. Admiral, Commander Torres called, the hegemony is hailing us.
Elena nodded, and Corthan's image appeared again. The hegemony admiral no longer looked amused. What is the meaning of this? He demanded.
These ships have no authority to be here.
Neither do yours, Elena replied.
The difference is, our ships are here to protect innocent lives.
Yours are here to end them.
You have changed nothing.
Corthan snarled.
Even with these additional ships, you are still outnumbered.
I will destroy you all and complete my mission. You might, Elena agreed.
But you'll pay a price for it. And every species in the galaxy will know that when evil came calling, some of us stood up to it. Corthan cut the transmission without another word. Around the Kethmori homeworld, over 300 ships took battle positions.
The hegemony fleet still outnumbered them, but the odds had shifted dramatically. More importantly, the galaxy was watching. Whatever happened in the next few hours would echo across known space for generations. Elena looked around her bridge one more time, meeting the eyes of each crew member.
Any regrets? She asked quietly. Just one, Commander Torres replied. I wish my grandmother could see this. She always said the family needed more heroes.
Elena nodded, then opened a channel to the entire Allied fleet. All ships, this is Admiral Foster.
Today we stand not as separate species, but as defenders of justice. Today we prove that right makes might, not the other way around. She paused, feeling the weight of history in her words. Today we show the universe that some things are worth fighting for. All ships, engage the enemy. The battle for Velnathi was about to begin, and, regardless of the outcome, nothing in the galaxy would ever be the same. The first salvos lit space like angry stars. Admiral Foster gripped the arms of her command chair as the Defiance shuddered under enemy fire. Around her, the bridge crew worked with desperate efficiency, calling out damage reports and coordinating with the rest of the Allied fleet. The tactical display showed a three-dimensional nightmare of ships, weapons fire, and debris. Direct hit on the port armor, Lieutenant Zhang reported. Sections 7 through 9 are venting atmosphere. Seal them off, Foster ordered. Engineering, I need more power to forward shields. Giving you everything we have, Admiral, came the reply through the comm system. The hegemony had opened the battle with a devastating barrage, their superior firepower tearing into the Allied lines. But the defenders had advantages of their own. They knew they were fighting for something larger than conquest or politics, they were fighting for the simple right of innocent beings to exist. That knowledge gave them a fury that surprised their enemies. The Eltarian destroyer Bright Wing is breaking up, Commander Torres reported grimly. No survivors detected. Foster watched on the tactical display as the brave ship's life signs winked out. Captain Drelnathan, his crew had held their position until the end, their sacrifice buying precious time for the evacuation ships fleeing the planet's surface. The Allied strategy was brutally simple: hold the line long enough for the Kethmori civilians to escape. Hundreds of transport ships were streaming away from Velnathi, carrying refugees to safety in human space. Every minute the fleet bought meant thousands more lives saved. Admiral, called the tactical officer, hegemony dreadnought moving to attack position. Target appears to be the evacuation corridor. Foster's blood ran cold. If the hegemony managed to reach the fleeing transports, the slaughter would be horrific. All ships, concentrate fire on that dreadnought. Do not let it through. The response was immediate and desperate. Ships from half a dozen species turned their weapons on the massive hegemony vessel, their combined firepower hammering at its shields. The dreadnought returned fire with contemptuous ease, its main batteries destroying a Shard collective cruiser in a single volley. But the attackers pressed their assault with reckless courage. A wing of Xerian fighters, their hulls scarred by mining operations, flew directly into the dreadnought's weapon batteries. They were destroyed instantly, but their sacrifice disrupted the enemy's firing pattern long enough for the Allied heavy ships to close range. "The Prometheus is making her attack run," Torres announced. Foster watched as the human heavy cruiser, her hull glowing with heat from enemy fire, charged directly at the dreadnought. At the last moment, Captain Rodriguez triggered his ship's self-destruct, turning the Prometheus into a kinetic weapon that punched through the enemy's shields and tore a massive gash in their hull. The dreadnought's advance stopped, but the cost was terrible. Another ship full of brave souls was gone, their sacrifice measured in the precious time it bought for others. "How many transports have cleared the system?" Foster asked. 67% of the civilian population, Zhang replied. The remaining ships need another 40 minutes to reach safe jump distance. 40 minutes. Foster looked at the tactical display, calculating odds that grew worse with each passing second. The Allied fleet was being systematically destroyed, their ships no match for hegemony firepower. But they were buying time with blood, and that was all that mattered. "Admiral," Communications Officer Hayes called suddenly, "we're receiving a transmission from the surface. It's Prime Minister Jalketh. Put him through." The elderly Kethmori's face appeared on the main screen, tears flowing freely down his silver-blue features. Behind him, Foster could see the evacuated chambers of the planetary government complex. "Admiral Foster," Jalketh said, his harmonic voice breaking with emotion, "please. You have done enough. Your people have done enough. Save yourselves while you still can." "Prime Minister," Foster replied gently, "we're not leaving until every last transport is clear." "But you're dying for us." Jalketh's composure finally broke completely. "Brave souls who should live long lives, who should see their children grow, who should know peace, they're dying for people they never met." Foster was quiet for a moment, watching young Lieutenant Hayes try to maintain her composure at her station. The woman couldn't be more than 25, with her whole life ahead of her. In 10 minutes, she would probably be dead. "Prime Minister," Foster said finally, "do you know what humans call this kind of battle? A last stand. It's when you plant your feet and refuse to move, no matter what the cost." She smiled sadly. "We're good at last stands. We've had a lot of practice." "I don't understand your species," Jalketh whispered. "That's okay," Foster replied. "Most of the time, we don't understand ourselves either." The transmission ended as another series of explosions rocked the Defiance. The ship's lights flickered, and Foster could smell smoke from the damaged sections. "Admiral," Torres called, "the hegemony is regrouping for another push. They're bringing up their reserve squadrons." Foster nodded grimly. The enemy had been holding back a third of their fleet, waiting for the Allied defenses to weaken. Now they sensed victory within reach. But, as the hegemony ships moved into attack position, something unexpected happened. "Admiral," Zhang said, his voice filled with disbelief, "I'm detecting new contacts. Ships emerging from hyperspace at the system's edge." "More hegemony reinforcements?" Foster asked, though her heart was already sinking at the thought. "Negative. I'm reading. Admiral, these are official fleet units. Altarian Navy, Xerian Defense Force, Shard Collective battle groups. Zhang's voice grew stronger with each identification. They're broadcasting official government codes. The main viewer shifted to show the new arrivals, and Foster's breath caught in her throat. Hundreds of ships were materializing at the edge of the system, their hulls bearing the official markings of galactic governments.
How? Torres wondered aloud. The answer came in the form of a transmission from the approaching fleet.
The face that appeared on screen belonged to Admiral Daktar of the Eltarian Navy, his crystalline features set in grim determination. "Human Admiral," he said formally, "I bring greetings from the Eltarian High Command. My government has reconsidered its position regarding the Kethmori situation." "Admiral Daktar," Foster replied carefully, "your government voted to condemn the Kethmori."
"That was before we learned the full truth of their innocence," Daktar said.
"Our intelligence services have completed their analysis of the evidence your ambassador Chen provided.
The fabrication is obvious."
His expression darkened.
"We also intercepted hegemony communications discussing their plans for Kethmori resources after the cleansing was complete."
Similar messages came from other fleet commanders. The Zirian Defense Force had discovered their government officials had been bribed to vote against the Kethmori. The Shard Collective had uncovered evidence of hegemony terrorist attacks on their own worlds, designed to implicate peaceful species. "The pattern became clear once we started looking," Admiral Daktar continued. "The hegemony has been systematically eliminating or subjugating anyone who might oppose their expansion. The Kethmori were simply the most recent target."
"And your governments decided to act?"
"When they learned that individual captains from our fleets had already joined the defense, they were inspired. It seems honor is not entirely dead among our people."
Daktar paused. "We owe you a debt, Admiral Foster.
Your species reminded us what courage looks like." The tactical situation changed dramatically as official fleet units from across the galaxy took positions around Velnathi. The hegemony now faced not a few dozen renegade ships, but the combined might of half the galactic community.
Admiral Korthan's response was predictably furious.
"This is an illegal interference in hegemony operations," he broadcast on all frequencies.
"The Council has ruled on this matter." "The Council was deceived," Admiral Daktar replied calmly. "We have evidence of your manipulation, your bribes, your lies. The Kethmori are innocent, and this attack is an act of unprovoked aggression. You cannot stop us. The hegemony will not be denied."
"Then, prove it," Foster interjected.
"Your fleet against ours. Winner takes all." The silence that followed stretched across space like a held breath.
Every ship in both fleets waited to see what Korthan would do. He still had a formidable force, but the odds had shifted dramatically. More importantly, he was no longer fighting to maintain galactic order, he was fighting to complete a genocide that the galaxy now knew was built on lies. When Korthan finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of inevitable defeat.
"This is not over. The hegemony will remember this betrayal." "Let them remember," Admiral Daktar replied. "Let them remember that when they came to slaughter the innocent, the galaxy stood united against them." The hegemony fleet began to withdraw, their ships disappearing into hyperspace one by one. They had won the political battle, but lost the moral one. More importantly, they had revealed their true nature to the entire galaxy. As the last hegemony ship vanished, Foster felt a wave of exhaustion wash over her. Around her, the bridge crew was cheering, their relief and joy filling the air. They had done the impossible, they had faced down the galaxy's greatest military power and won. But the cost had been terrible. Foster looked at the casualty reports scrolling across her screen. Thousands of brave beings had died in the defense of Velnathi. The Eltarian destroyer Bright Wing, the human cruiser Prometheus, dozens of other ships whose crews had chosen honor over survival. "Admiral," Commander Torres said quietly, "Prime Minister Jal Keth is requesting permission to address the fleet." Foster nodded, and the Kethmori leader's face appeared on every ship in the Allied Armada. His features were composed now, but the tears still glistened on his cheeks. "Brave defenders," he said, his harmonic voice carrying across space, "what you have done today will be remembered for as long as my people draw breath. You came when we had no one else. You stood when others would not. You died so that strangers might live."
He paused, gathering himself for his next words. The Kethmori have served this galaxy for 3,000 years, asking nothing in return for our aid. Today we learned the true meaning of service from species barely a century old. His gaze seemed to look directly at Foster. Humanity, you have shown us what it means to be truly civilized. After the transmission ended, Foster remained on the bridge, watching the rescue ships move among the debris, searching for survivors. The battle was over, but its consequences would echo across the galaxy for generations. Humanity had announced itself to galactic civilization not with conquest or trade, but with an act of pure moral courage. They had risked everything for beings they barely knew, simply because it was the right thing to do. The galaxy would never see them the same way again. And, in the depths of space, in the hidden bases where the hegemony planned their next moves, military leaders began to speak in hushed tones about the species that valued honor above survival. The species that had stood alone against impossible odds. The species that might stand again. 6 months after the Battle of Velnathi, Ambassador Sarah Chen stood in the newly constructed Kethmori settlement on New Harmony, watching children play in gardens that grew under an alien sun. The refugee world, located in human space, had become home to nearly 2 billion Kethmori who had chosen to start fresh rather than return to their devastated homeworlds. The integration had not been without challenges. The Kethmori were a peaceful people and used to the casual chaos of human society, while humans struggled to understand a species that saw violence as an absolute last resort. But, somehow, it was working. "Fascinating, isn't it?" said a familiar harmonic voice behind her. Sarah turned to see Veltar approaching, the former ambassador now serving as New Harmony's planetary administrator. In the months since the battle, the Kethmori had recovered from their trauma with remarkable resilience, aided by a species-wide determination to rebuild rather than despair. "What's fascinating?" Sarah asked. "Watch the children," Veltar said, gesturing toward the playground. "See how the human and Kethmori young ones play together? They have invented games that neither species could play alone." Sarah looked more closely and smiled. Human children, with their boundless energy and creative chaos, had somehow found common ground with young Kethmori, whose forearms allowed for completely new types of group activities. They were creating something unprecedented, a truly hybrid culture. "They're adapting faster than the adults," Sarah observed. "Children always do," Veltar replied. "They do not know what should be impossible, so they make it possible instead." She paused, watching a mixed group of youngsters attempt to build what appeared to be a four-dimensional fort. "Perhaps that is why your species does so well with impossible things." Sarah laughed, remembering the weeks of diplomatic crisis that had followed the battle. The Galactic Council had spent months debating humanity's irregular intervention in Kethmori affairs, while the hegemony had lodged formal protests about human interference in legitimate enforcement actions. The protests had become increasingly hollow as evidence of hegemony manipulation spread throughout the galaxy. Admiral Korthan and 17 other senior officers were now facing trial for war crimes, their carefully planned genocide exposed for all to see. The hegemony itself was fragmenting as member species reconsidered their allegiances. "Any word from the Council today?" Sarah asked. Veltar's expression grew amused. "They have extended yet another invitation for humanity to join as full members, with special recognition for your unique perspective on galactic affairs." "And Earth's response?" "President Martinez has respectfully declined, citing humanity's need to focus on refugee resettlement and learning from our new friends." Veltar's forearms moved in what Sarah had learned was the Kethmori equivalent of a shrug. "I believe he enjoys making them wait." Sarah nodded approvingly. The Council's sudden eagerness to embrace humanity reeked of political opportunism. They had ignored Earth for decades, dismissing humans as too primitive for serious consideration. Now that humanity had demonstrated both military courage and moral clarity, suddenly, they wanted to be best friends. President Martinez's strategy was brilliant in its simplicity: make them prove they had truly changed. "Speaking of the Council," Sarah said, "have you heard about the hegemony's latest request?" "No, what now?" "They want to negotiate a mutual understanding with humanity. Something about recognizing each other's spheres of influence." Veltar made a sound that Sarah had learned was Kethmori laughter. "I can imagine how that was received." Admiral Foster sent back a single-word response, no. They walked in comfortable silence through the settlement, passing markets where human and Kethmori merchants worked side by side, schools where teachers of both species shared knowledge, medical centers where doctors combined human intuition with Kethmori precision to achieve results neither could accomplish alone.
Sarah, Veltar said suddenly, may I ask you something that has puzzled me for months?
Of course.
Why did you do it?
The question was simple, but Sarah could hear the depth of emotion behind it.
Your people gained nothing from helping us.
You risked everything for beings you had never met.
Why? Sarah considered the question carefully.
It was one she had been asked dozens of times by diplomats, journalists, and military leaders from across the galaxy.
The answer never got easier to explain. Do you know what humans call a teachable moment? She asked finally.
No. It's when someone does something so obviously wrong that you can't ignore it, even if speaking up might cost you everything. Sarah stopped walking and turned to face her friend.
When we learned what was happening to your people, we had a choice. We could stay safe and silent, or we could stand up and say this is wrong.
But the risk was worth taking, Sarah interrupted gently. Veltar, my species has made a lot of mistakes. We've fought wars over resources, territory, ideology.
We've done things we're not proud of.
She gestured toward the mixed groups of humans and Kethmori going about their daily lives.
But sometimes we get the chance to do something purely right. When that chance comes, you have to take it.
Veltar was quiet for a moment, processing this.
Even if it means war?
Especially then, Sarah replied.
Peace built on injustice isn't really peace, it's just deferred violence.
Real peace comes when everyone knows that wrong will be opposed, regardless of who commits it. They resumed walking, their path taking them toward the settlement center, where a memorial had been erected to honor those who died at Velnathi. The names of every ship, every crew member, every being who had given their life in defense of the innocent were carved in stone that seemed to shimmer with its own inner light. The galaxy has changed since that day, Veltar observed. Species that had not spoken in centuries are now forming new alliances. The Zirian Defense Pact, the Altarian Humanitarian Alliance, the Shard Collective Peace Initiative.
The hegemony's victims are finding each other, Sarah agreed. They're realizing they don't have to face bullies alone.
And, at the center of it all, humanity serves as, what is your phrase?
The glue that holds it together? Sarah smiled at the mixed metaphor. Something like that.
Though I think we prefer catalyst. We started the reaction, but everyone else is making it happen. They reached the Memorial Plaza, where a small crowd had gathered for the weekly remembrance ceremony. Humans, Kethmori, and representatives from a dozen other species stood together in silent tribute to the fallen. At the center of the group, Sarah was surprised to see a figure she recognized.
Is that Admiral Daktar? She asked.
Veltar nodded.
He comes every week when his duties permit.
He says it helps him remember why he chose to fight that day. Admiral Daktar of the Altarian Navy had become something of a legend in the months since Velnathi. His decision to bring official fleet units to the battle had inspired similar actions across the galaxy, creating a new precedent for military intervention in humanitarian crises. As the ceremony concluded, Daktar approached them, his crystalline features reflecting the light of New Harmony's sun. Ambassador Chen, Administrator Veltar, he said formally, then smiled, an expression that looked strange but genuine on his alien features.
Sarah, Veltar. It's good to see you both.
Admiral, Sarah replied warmly.
How are things in the rest of the galaxy?
Interesting, Daktar said, which Sarah had learned was Altarian diplomatic speak for complicated. The Council is struggling to maintain relevance as more species form independent alliances.
The hegemony continues to fragment. And humanity's reputation grows more fearsome by the day.
Fearsome?
Sarah raised an eyebrow.
Not fearsome as in terrifying, Daktar clarified quickly. Fearsome as in impressively formidable.
Do you know what pirates and raiders now say when they encounter a ship under human protection?
I'm afraid to ask. Nothing, Daktar replied with obvious satisfaction. They simply leave. The phrase under human protection has become the most effective deterrent in known space. Sarah felt a mix of pride and concern at this news. Humanity's reputation for defending the innocent was certainly useful, but she worried about the expectations it created. Speaking of which, Daktar continued, I bring a request from the Centauri Collective. They have a situation that requires the human approach to justice.
What kind of situation?
Veltar asked.
Slave traders operating out of the Magellan Nebula. They've been taking refugees from the border wars, selling them in the Outer Rim. The Council claims they lack jurisdiction, the local governments are either bought off or intimidated, and standard diplomatic approaches have failed.
Sarah sighed. This was the fourth such request this month. Word of humanity's intervention at Velnathi had spread throughout the galaxy, and, suddenly, every oppressed group wanted human help.
I'll pass the request along to Admiral Foster, she said. But, Admiral, you need to understand, we can't police the entire galaxy.
We're barely a century into spaceflight ourselves.
I know, Daktar replied.
But, perhaps that is your strength.
You see injustice as something to be fixed, not something to be managed.
The rest of us have grown comfortable with the way things are. After Daktar left, Sarah and Veltar continued their walk through the settlement. The sun was setting, painting the alien sky in shades of purple and gold that no human world had ever seen. In the distance, construction crews were working on new housing blocks, expanding the settlement to accommodate the steady stream of refugees seeking sanctuary in human space.
Sarah, Veltar said eventually, do you think your people understand what they have started?
I hope not, Sarah replied honestly.
If they fully understood the implications, they might be too smart to continue. And, if they did understand?
Sarah thought about that for a moment, watching human children teach Kethmori youngsters how to play soccer with 4 arms instead of 2.
Then, they'd probably do it anyway, she said finally. Humans have a gift for doing the right thing for completely the wrong reasons. We act first and worry about consequences later. Is that wisdom or foolishness?
Yes, Sarah said, and Veltar's harmonic laughter filled the evening air.
As night fell over New Harmony, message drones arrived carrying reports from across the galaxy.
The hegemony had lost another member world. 3 species had applied to join the growing network of human-protected systems.
A trade consortium was requesting human mediation in a resource dispute.
Pirates had abandoned a planned raid after learning their targets were under human protection. Sarah read the reports in her office, marveling at how quickly things were changing. 6 months ago, humanity had been an insignificant backwater species barely worth acknowledging. Now they were becoming the moral center of a new galactic order.
The irony was not lost on her.
The galaxy had spent millennia building a civilization based on politics, economics, and military power. Then, a species barely out of its own solar system had shown them something they had forgotten. Sometimes the right thing to do was also the smart thing to do. Justice, it turned out, was good business. Species protected by humanity were more stable, more prosperous, more willing to trade and cooperate. The chaos of constant exploitation was giving way to something unprecedented in galactic history, genuine peace based on mutual respect rather than mutual fear. The Kethmori had been the first to experience this new approach to civilization.
But they would not be the last.
As Sarah prepared her daily report to Earth, she included a recommendation that would have seemed insane 6 months earlier: humanity should formally accept the galaxy's designation as protectors of the innocent. Not as conquerors or rulers, but as the species willing to stand between the strong and the weak.
It was a responsibility that could consume them.
A burden that would demand sacrifices no one could calculate. A role that would make enemies of every tyrant and bully in known space. But, as she looked out her window at human and Kethmori families sharing evening meals under alien stars, Sarah knew it was also their destiny. The galaxy had taught humanity what it meant to be civilized.
Now humanity was teaching the galaxy what civilization could become.
And, in the depths of space, in hidden bases and secret meetings, the remnants of the old order whispered fearfully about the species that valued justice above survival. The species that had changed the rules of the game.
The species that would never back down. The galaxy would never be the same.
And, for the first time in millennia, that was a very good thing.